Welcome back. We're going to draw some simple value scales and then a sphere using black and white charcoal today. We're going to begin first by drawing a rectangle almost the width of your paper near the top, about 1 inch tall, like that. Inch and a quarter tall. And let's make another rectangle under it that's a little narrower. And we're going to use that one later. They don't have to be perfectly drawn. Don't look for rulers. And we're going to make a square in the middle of this rectangle. And we're going to make an X under it. And that's going to remind us that we're not going to color inside that square. Now we're going to take this side to the left of the square. We're going to divide it in half. And then we're going to divide the halves in half. So we're going to end up with quarters. And then we're going to go to the right of the X over here. We're going to divide that in half and divide the halves in half. And that gives us 9 units going across the rectangle. Do not divide the lower rectangle into anything. Just leave it as it is. Now we're going to take our charcoal pencil, the HB charcoal pencil, it should say on it. And using your first shading direction, please go this way if you're right-handed, this way if you're left-handed. We're going to do a first shading over the 4 squares to the left of the X. So we're just going to lay a nice even tone. Use very light pressure, lots of lines, and try to get a nice even tone across all 4 of these squares. And when we're drawing the sphere, we're going to start the same way. We're going to start by doing a first shading with black everywhere there's a shadow. And we're going to do a first shading with white everywhere that's in light. And we're not going to touch the halftones. The X represents the halftones. Remember, if you're having a hard time shading lightly like this, the trick is focus on relaxing your grip on your pencil. If you're using if you're holding your pencil with a light grip, you're going to find it's impossible to make a dark mark. So we're doing the same thing over here now. Please, if you're right-handed, do not follow my shading direction. Go the other way. And what we're going to find is that at the end of this process, our middle 3 squares are going to be done. I'm going to show you that in a second. So these are now done. We have a nice even sequence of 3 values, and I bet you can guess where we're going next. We're going to be moving out, and as we do that, we're going to change shading direction so that we're cross-hatching. So we're going to switch to a horizontal direction, And we're going to go just the 3 squares on the end. Try to do this neatly. Our goal here, especially along this edge, our goal is to have nice sharp edges between our values. And also feel free to get up and sharpen your pencil at any time. Now we're going to do the same thing with white with these 3. Do not go back and smudge your work. In fact, you want to be careful to not let your hands drag through your work and accidentally smudge it either. You may find you need to press a little bit harder with the white than with the black to get the same effect. And now our value scale is more or less complete with these 5 steps. And we're going to switch now to vertical shading. And pressing again a little harder. And we're going to do just the outside 2 squares. Don't let this one get too black. We're saving the black for the very farthest outside squares. So we've got that, and you don't have to try to remember our shading directions from this lesson. We're just randomly varying them. You can do them in a different order. It wouldn't make any difference. And now we should have fairly even steps on these inside 7. It's looking pretty good. We're going to go back and do a little correcting at the very end. And I'm going to come around and look at your work in a second, but let me just quickly finish this. Now I'm going to take these outside squares, and because we're using a hard charcoal pencil, I'm not expecting or trying to make this completely black, but I'm going to mix up my shading direction, and without pressing too hard, I'm just going to, and without smudging, I'm just going to see how dark I can get. See that? That's like, it's not completely black, but that's as dark as this instrument wants to go. And I'm going to do the same thing with white over here. And to get a balanced effect with the white, I need to press a little harder again than with the black, but and what typically happens when I get this far is I'm going to see there's some areas where if I squint my eyes a little, I can see like some of the squares are kind of blurring together. Like these two feel a little close to me, and this jump feels a little big. So I'm going to go back and I'm using random directions now. I'm using some sharpening strokes. And I'm just trying to make this a little more of an even progression. I'm going to sharpen this edge a tiny bit, and I'm going to sharpen this edge even less. And that feels good for my darks. Although, can you see I went a little too far, like this jump feels a little big. So stop what you're doing for a second. I just want to show you how to use the kneaded erasers. Those are the erasers that look like clay. You can actually mask an edge, and then you don't rub these back and forth. What you do is you just press them down, and that's a way that you can lighten something without erasing it completely. You see my hatching is still there. I actually took off a little too much. That's why these are so important for shaded studies, because you often go a little too hard on something, but you don't want to completely erase it. So like right here, it's a little too dark, so I can just lightly pounce this like that. And you'll see it picks up a lot of charcoal. So the way this works is when it gets dark on the outside, that's when you actually need your eraser, but just by working it between your hands and getting it so that it looks clean again on the outside, and then you can use it again. So on the next value scale, we are going to do the first shading the same way. We always start with first shading. And we're going to just shade up to the area under the X. Just to identify where our darks and our lights are going to go. And then what we're trying to do on this one is what's called a graduated value scale. So on this one, we're going to press really hard on the outside, color that in, and then we're going to do our transitional shading, just shading towards the middle. And with every stroke, lift your pencil off the paper so that you get that nice fade into the gray. And we're going to do the same thing with white, but the rule here is, and listen carefully, we're not going to let the black and the white ever mix together. Black and white can lay next to each other like this, but they can never mix together like that. So we're going to leave the gray paper in the middle, and you'll notice if you do it correctly, the transition looks so even that you don't even notice that there's any gray paper there. If you accidentally go a little too far, you can just take your kneaded eraser and open that area up again. That's something you'll be doing a lot if you do this kind of work. And look at how I can adjust my values without starting over. It's not possible to do that with a regular eraser, obviously. So you'll notice our shading direction wasn't too important when we did these. It's really important to get a nice smooth transition. And to check your work, you want to make sure like this value should correspond to this. This value should be about the same as here. That's why I like to do these right one under the other, so you can check your work yourself. And these values should all correspond pretty closely to the value directly above them. And what we have here is really an illusion that there's something here when there isn't. That's something we talked about before. You don't have to do this, but I just want to show you if you do mix your black and your white, you get a much uglier effect. So this is not what we want to see. You see what's happening? It's creating a different kind of gray than the color of the paper, and it really stands out, and it looks like a mistake. I'll show you what happens. I'm going to show you some drawings from the last class. This one is very good. There's a nice open space between the dark and the light. There's no mixing of black and white in that transition at all. But on this one, for example, the black and the white are trying to mix together, and it looks very different and a little clumsier, I think you'd agree. Do you see the difference? Okay. So if you're not quite done with your value scales, you can go back to that, but we're going to go ahead and proceed with the spheres. This time only, if you're feeling really challenged by drawing a circle and you want to trace the inside of a roll of masking tape or something, I will allow that, because this is not really about drawing circles. This is about shading technique. But in any case, do the best you can to create a circle. And I'm going to demonstrate which way the light is moving for you, although you probably can see that already. I'm going from the inside shadows on the ground and creating a diameter at about 20 degrees. So there's my diameter. That's about 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Here's my light. And my ellipse intersects right here, which is at about 8 o'clock. And here, which is, let's see, if this is 6, this is about 4:30. This is actually about 3:30 here, and this is about 9:30 here. So we're going to intersect here and here. Another clue that might help me is that this angle between these 2 points is a little shallower than this angle. See that? So this angle should just be, it slopes, but not as much as this. And before we draw the cast shadow, I want to really emphasize for a second this opportunity for more fractional thinking. If I get rid of this, let me put my diameter back in. So we know where this point is, and we know where this point is. We're right now trying to discover where this goes, because what we're trying to draw is this So about where do we need to land here? Anybody? It's about how far between here and here? I'd say it's pretty close to the middle. So make a mark near the middle, and then we're going to be curving down towards that mark and then curving back up. We could have calculated it more precisely, but what we're trying to avoid right now is just like the really major errors that I sometimes see my students make. So let's get it just somewhere near the middle and we'll be good. And now we're going to use fractional thinking one more time. If we know this distance and we don't know this distance, how big is this compared to this? About. Anybody? It's about half, right? Is that what you said? So yeah, we know this, we don't know this. This is about half as far as that. And that's really important because when a lot of you guys draw these, you're gonna want to draw the shadow like way down here. So that simple step is going to prevent you from doing that. So now we know where this ellipse starts. We know where it peaks. We know where it peaks at the bottom. And we know where it peaks here, and we know where it ends. So that should help you draw that ellipse properly. Hopefully just drawing ellipses in general is getting a lot easier for you with all the practice you've had. And then if you have some boundaries, if you know where it needs to fit, you should do okay. And that's the basic geometry of our light. I'm not going to check your work, though, until first shading is done, so we're going to keep moving ahead. We don't want to shade on top of any construction lines, so we're going to erase most of them. We still need this one, obviously, because that's going to tell us where our light ends, but we'll get rid of the other ones. And notice I'm not using the kneaded eraser, I'm just using a regular eraser. And now first shading. So the same way we did the first shading on the value scale, please, right-handed people, you're going the other way. And we're just coloring in these two shadow shapes. And we're not coloring them in separately, we're coloring them in as if they were just one big shape. And if you want to go all the way to the line, you can. If you want to leave a little space below that line, that's fine too. We are going to need some space around that line, but we're also going to have to erase that line in a minute. So when we erase it, we can open up some space there. And notice that this shape is the only part of the entire photograph that is not receiving direct light. Everywhere else is receiving some light. And that means theoretically everywhere else in the drawing should be shaded with white. But I'm going to save myself some trouble, and I'm going to say the back wall here is almost a half tone, so I'm just going to leave that untouched. And all I'm going to do with white is the top half of the ball and the ground plane. While I'm working here, let me explain that a lot of you in middle school or elementary school were probably taught that you always need to draw all the way to the edge of your paper. That's true when you're doing a composition, but today we're just doing a study. And the difference is when you're doing a study, you're just practicing rendering a form. You're not creating a whole composition. So instead of shading all the way to the edge of the paper, we're going to do what's called vignetting. And that means we're just going to fade. We're going to shade the ground a little bit around the shape, but then we're going to just fade away. There we go. So that's finished first shading. And I'm going to come around and check yours. So while you're finishing up here, I want to explain something really important, which is that at this stage in your drawing, you have a great opportunity to make corrections. If you've been following what I've been asking you to do, you have not yet made any lines in the entire drawing that you had to press hard for. We've used a very light pressure from beginning and up until this stage. We're about to start using a darker line, but before we do that, notice that your drawing at this stage is something that your brain can read as a three-dimensional object pretty easily. When it's just a shadow map, when it's just a pattern of outlines, your brain has a really hard time interpreting what it's seeing as in 3 dimensions. When you're just seeing this and this and this, your brain doesn't look at that and see anything in 3D. And so whether you've done it right or whether you've done it wrong is pretty hard for your brain to detect. Your brain you look back and forth between this and that, and I can tell that there's something wrong about it, but it's kind of difficult to tell what. When you compare this to that, it's relatively easy to make corrections because your mistakes are going to really stand out. Because your brain knows that it's looking at something supposed to be 3-dimensional, and your brain can easily recognize if there's something off about it. So if you see anything that needs to be corrected now, this is the time to do it. We're not going to stop and do too many corrections right now because this is such a simple drawing. But if you get to a higher level and you're doing, for example, a portrait of a friend, this is the perfect time to look at your drawing and ask yourself if it looks like the person. You can make corrections easily and without destroying your paper, and you want to keep pushing and pulling these shadow shapes until you've created the effect that you're going for. I'm also at this point, I'm going to go back and erase my shadow map along this soft edge because this area, remember, is the area that needs to stay completely blank. This is the area that corresponds up here to this blank square. And so to create this soft transition, we need to open up some space through here. The next step in the drawing is familiar to you because it's exactly what we did when we were drawing with graphite pencil and on white paper. And so these are the most difficult moves that we've learned so far, but they're going to be at least familiar to you. And I'm going to start off kind of light, and I'm doing some sharpening strokes along my outside curve. And then as I move towards the middle, my strokes get straighter and straighter. And as I get towards the other side, I'm starting to curve the other way, and I want to end up curving with the ball going up and around this way. And notice I'm not going back and forth like this. If you're still shading back and forth along the edge, you're not going to get the effect we want. Every stroke has to start in the shadow, the core shadow, and you're lifting your pencil off the page with every stroke like that, so that every stroke is doing exactly what we want the transition to do, which is to get lighter as it moves upward. So don't grind back and forth. We're just one stroke at a time, and every stroke you're releasing your pencil off the paper as it enters that gray zone. Exactly like you did here, right? It was probably seemed easier here because this was flat and this is three-dimensional, but it's the same procedure. I can do a little bit also back towards the bottom. So that this looks a little bit of a smoother transition. And that's about all I'm going to do for this shadow side. That's my second shading. Remember, it doesn't matter at this point if you're left-handed or right-handed. It's the same technique either way. And now I'm going to do second shading on the ground plane. And that's also something you'll remember. We're going to use horizontal lines down here. Shade straight across. And notice I'm throwing in a few sharpening strokes to bring out this edge, and then I'm transitioning into a series of horizontal strokes. And I'm trying to stay in the line, but I'm not trying to stay too exactly in the line because there is a little bit of a fuzz along here, and I'm certainly not doing any sharpening strokes at the outside of that shadow. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side, a little sharpening here, and then some horizontals. And what I'm doing now is I'm just bringing out the differences within the shadow side of the object. And part of that is going to be going a lot darker in the occlusion shadow, right under the ball. Remember, that's that little secondary cast shadow of the ball from the reflected light source of the wall behind it. And anytime you're having a hard time getting the edge sharp enough, usually means your pencil's getting a little dull. You get a really nice sharp pencil and you can create a really nice sharp edge. When I check your work, I really care that the main shading direction on this ground plane is horizontal. That's really important because otherwise your ground plane's not going to look like it's laying down flat. And now that that's dark enough, I can see that I need to go a little darker through my core shadow, especially on the left where it's curving up away from the reflected light. And what you'll see is that, remember I just said what we're doing is bringing out differences, and you'll see we brought them out a little too far. Like that reflected light is really standing out a lot more in my drawing than it is in the photograph. And so what we need to do is unify this area. If you're having the same problem, and the way we unify an area is most efficiently is usually just to revert to our first shading direction and just shade back over this whole zone one more time. And you see what's happening? It's just sort of pushing that reflected light back into the surrounding shadow area so it doesn't stand out so much. Another thing you'll remember from earlier lessons is that there's a place right in here where the value of the cast shadow and the form shadow are about the same, and so your edge just kind of disappears. Just let it disappear. Remember, your brain is going to complete that. The brain of whoever looks at your drawing is going to complete that edge for you. Anytime you're drawing an edge, ask yourself, why can I even see that edge? And how clearly can I see it? And then just try to reproduce those effects. What you don't want to do is fall back on just using a hard outline to bring out edges that you cannot see in real life. And I don't think he would mind if I... This is what happened in the other class where somebody was doing a really nice drawing and then they just went back and created an outline here between these two identical values. And can you see how cartoonish that looks compared to the photograph? Or compared to a drawing like this one where she just let that area alone? So you really want to resist the temptation to do those hard outlines. So on the ground plane, we're going to continue the horizontal lines that we used for the cast shadow. And I'm going to be very careful about bringing that light right up to the edge of the ball because this is one of my sharpest edges here. That's probably the sharpest edge in the whole motif. If we zoom in on it, you see how crisp that is? So to get that crispness, we need to shade right up to it with the horizontal lines. And then using really light pressure, we want to do a few little sharpening strokes to just push that white even closer to that edge and bring it out even a little more. But the key there is you can't press too hard with it or it'll look like a white outline, which is not what we're trying to do. Down here, we don't want our edge to be so sharp. In fact, I'm going to try to get the effect of this secondary shadow by stopping my shading just a little bit out from where stopping my whites, leaving this little gap between my whites and my darks. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Try to work on whatever step I'm working on, and you can always go back and touch things up at the end, but I don't want you to miss too much instruction. So again, a little bit of sharpening strokes along this edge. And then leaving a very small gap between the shadow and the white along that edge. And I don't want to get too technical, but you'll notice that our horizontal lines on the ground have the benefit of becoming sharpening strokes along the straightaway of the shadow. And that works for us because you'll notice that this shadow edge is much more focused here than it is out here. And the reason for that is because that little zone of diffusion between the black and the white is very foreshortened here, and it's not foreshortened here. So we can get away with leaving this a little bit sharper and leaving these outside turns a little bit fuzzier. So, to finish, we need to do some sharpening, very light sharpening strokes around where the ball meets the outside, the back wall, because we want this to be a really nice sharp edge. Hopefully your shadow mapping where you drew the circle is light enough that it's not distracting, but your drawing will look better if you actually erase that most of the way. Outlines take away from a realistic effect. And I want to say just a few words about realism. The nice thing about realism, if you're learning to draw, is that the criteria of success are very clear, and your brain can recognize them. In other words, you can look at a realistic drawing of a ball like this, and if you look at your paper and you think, oh, I could pick that up off the paper, my brain interprets that as a real object. That means your drawing is very precise and controlled. And if you look at your drawing and you think, it doesn't look real, it means your drawing is not very precise and controlled. Now, the point of this is not that realistic drawings are better than drawings that are less realistic. The point is that if we're learning to draw, we want to learn how to create controlled effects. And that's really just a matter of visual understanding and eye-hand coordination. It's the same thing that's going on as what I've already described. When you learn how to draw a portrait, your brain says, oh, that looks like someone I know, then you've succeeded. If it doesn't look like someone you know, then you have not succeeded. If this sphere looks like something you could pick up with your hands, you've done a great job. And if it doesn't, then you need to practice a little more. But basic idea is that criteria could not be clearer. And once you learn how to meet these criteria, you're going to have the kind of skills that you could apply to a wide range of other tasks, such as architecture, interior design, fashion design, carpentry, anything that involves manipulating physical things in the world can be greatly assisted if you know how to draw them. So this area, notice I'm trying to curve my lines, and I'm creating my center light right now. The center of the light is the plane that faces the light source, and we know where the light's coming from. We mapped that in the beginning. It's coming from like this direction. So our center light is this whole zone up here, and it drops off fairly quickly as it reaches down towards the equator of our shadow edge. Don't get confused between the center light and the highlight. We'll do the highlight in a minute. The highlight is not always going to be centered on the center light. The reason that these things are becoming, the reason that this plane is getting darker is because the planes that face the light are brighter than planes that are tilted away from the light, because the same amount of light is spread over a smaller area. So that pretty much takes care of my center light. Now I'm looking for my highlight, is right about here. And that's where I'm going to let myself press a little harder. Notice that the highlight is below the middle of the center light because the highlight corresponds to the position of the camera in relation to the sphere and not just where the light is in relation to the sphere. Okay, so that about does it for this demonstration. Thanks for watching.